Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor and owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. Glad to have you on the show today. I'm talking about how to build a socially conscious business. A little bit different today, not so technical. I've got some technical stuff next week to come back with. So if you like the technical stuff, then fear not. But today I'm going to be a little more fluffy and a little more conversational and conceptual and talk about, again, how to build a socially conscious business. So this is primarily for business owners in my community, but also it could be for employees of a business that want to also be aware of how their employer could think about these things. So it's mainly for business owners and kind of really talking about how to build a socially conscious business. But again, also could be for those who are participating in their business or the company they work for. So could be for others as well. So I'm going to talk about this today through the lens of how I approach it. And so I'm going to start with what I think it means to be socially conscious and what that means. But I want to stress that what I talk about today does not mean that my definition has to apply to you, or that the things I talk about in my business have to apply to your business, or that any definitions I use necessarily have to be a one size fits all. So keep that in mind. I want to stress that. This is coming from my experience and my learning process as well. So. And this has come up a lot recently. We're seeing more and more that, especially bigger companies, are taking more of a stand when it comes to their position on social issues and environmental issues and causes that affect their communities and the world in general. And so we're seeing that more and more companies, and both big and small businesses, are starting to, like I said, take a stand on certain issues and take a stand on things they believe in. And so this is something a lot of small businesses are thinking about as well. And I came upon this concept more recently in a newsletter I subscribe to, which is the Anti-Racism Daily newsletter. And one of the questions asked was, hey, how can I as a small business contribute and be socially conscious in the world? I'm a tiny business. I don't make a ton of money. I'm not some big Fortune 500 with deep pockets that can, write checks and help address issues in the world. What do I do as a small business? And I thought it was a really good question. And there were some discussion points I'm going to bring up, and just sort of my thoughts on how I approach it as well, because I'm also a small business. I'm a small business owner, and my impact is limited, much like yours might be if you're also a small business owner. So first of all, let's talk about what it means to be socially conscious. There are different ways of saying this. Some people say socially responsible or socially conscious or whatever that definition might sound like. And again, this is my definition, not a one size fits all, but to me, it means that you are aware and concerned about the impact we're having on certain things. For example, the environment. Maybe you're concerned. There might be some confusion, but concerned about the fossil fuel consumption in our world, deforestation. Maybe you support clean energy. Maybe you are concerned that there is a very real negative environmental impact we are having on the world, and that we should be cognizant of how to improve our impact in the world and reduce our fossil fuel footprint and support renewable energy and find ways to attempt to reverse and improve what's happening in the world in terms of environmental negative impact. Also being aware and concerned about lack of equity and inclusion in our society and social issues. Being socially conscious to me means believing that there is such a thing as systemic racism and gender bias, and you're concerned about inclusion and human rights in various levels of organization in our world. You're concerned about access to healthcare or housing or financial services. You're concerned about employment rights and benefits and opportunities for people. So these are things that I think of when I think of someone being socially conscious. And I want to be careful here and say that this can be a tricky issue to talk about and to navigate. For some, it's trickier than others. What I find tricky about it is some of this turns political. I'll just be honest about this. Sometimes people turn these issues into political issues, and sometimes they really are political issues. To me, I'm not tied to any particular party when it comes to these issues. I think you can find socially conscious people in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the independents. I'm a registered independent personally. I kind of reject the notion that I have to claim some sort of membership in a particular political party to be socially conscious. And so this turns political very quickly. And often, when people and businesses are attempting to be socially conscious and to make an impact, they get labeled as virtue signaling or get labeled as, keep politics out of business. And there's all sorts of opinions. So you have to be aware that, if you're going to make an effort to be socially conscious as a person or a business owner, that stuff is going to happen. You're going to get, pushback and resistance and criticism. There's no shortage of criticism when it comes to taking a stand on social issues like this. So, but again, I don't think it's tied to any political party or religion or membership in any particular club or something. So I've seen that a socially conscious attitude can be present in many different identities. So I'll leave it at that. So let's talk about ways to build a socially conscious business. So as a person, let's say you're not a business owner. As a person, there are obviously things you can do. But as a business owner, we sometimes have access to choices and opportunities that are different. And I think it's interesting and enjoyable to talk about those things and to find ways to make a positive impact. So let's talk about community level. So there's a few things that usually come up at the community level. So let's say you're a small business in your community. What are some things you can do in your community to make an impact? One, as a business owner, is vote. Again, I talked about it being political or not political, and in some cases, it's very political. And voting, not just for big national, obvious candidates or races, but locally in your community. Do research on the candidates in your community that affect your local legislation, and vote for candidates that demonstrate a commitment to socially conscious issues, for issues that are important to you. Volunteer. Also, as a business owner, ideally, for most of us anyway, or some of us, we hopefully have more flexibility. We're able to not necessarily be kind of locked into a 9 to 5, but we have the flexibility to control our own schedules, which allows us to say yes to more volunteer opportunities than others might. So volunteering in organizations that are supporting marginalized communities or doing good in your community. Also giving, pretty obvious one. Give money. If you, I know some businesses that have a set kind of formula or a set amount set aside that, a certain amount of their net profits, they contribute towards certain causes or organizations in their community. That can be a really direct way to make an impact as a business. So as you're making more money, as you're focusing on profits, which we should be as a business, then that is also helping create a positive impact through your contributions. So that's something you can do. What about on a larger scale? So in our communities is one thing, but on a larger scale, same things: vote, volunteer, and give. It kind of applies the same way. So to me, voting at a national level is very important. Doing research and thoughtfully considering candidates that you feel come closest to the values that are important to you. Are you supporting candidates that are aware of the negative impact that we may be having in the environment, and is discussing and supporting ways to improve? Are you supporting candidates that address the social issues that are important to you? Volunteering as well. I volunteer for and have for some national organizations in the past, and giving also to some national organizations, and at the bigger kind of global level, there are things you could do that are similar. So let's talk about business specific stuff. Let's talk about business operations. So there are a few things you can do in your business operations, in my opinion, that are interesting to think about and to make an impact. So one is to evaluate your partners and service providers. So a lot of us, we don't think about this all the time, but more and more I'm seeing, and I do this personally, I'm seeing more and more small businesses take a more critical eye toward the suppliers and service providers and partners they work with. So one example for me, just kind of to give you an example that's relevant to my business, there are certain service providers that I work with. One of those is a custodian. So I work with custodians, and that's the organization that holds my clients' money. So when I do investment management for my clients, we open up IRA accounts and 401k accounts and various different types of investment accounts. The custodian is the one that holds the money. There are lots of custodians out there. I'm not going to name any of the big names that I'm going to, the big names. There's big names out there that hold money, and they have commercials on TV and talk about investments. And many of them don't have a great track record. They have a reputation for not being terribly socially conscious, not necessarily demonstrating commitment toward positive impact on the environment or positive impact on social issues, or even are reported as having negative reputation when it comes to social issues in hiring practices or just in a lot of areas. So I use a custodian that I consider socially conscious. I have chosen to use a custodian that is clearly demonstrating values that I align with. The one I use is called Altruist. They also have great technology, which I love, and that's also one of the big selling points. But the company itself, if you look at the team, for example, strong commitment to diversity. You'll see people of color of all kinds. You'll see gender identities represented. You'll see a strong commitment from a hiring and team building standpoint of diversity and inclusion. You also see Altruist doing a lot of work supporting organizations that empower marginalized communities. So, for example, in June for Pride Month, Altruist made a number of donations to Out in Tech, which is an organization that supports and empowers the LGBT community in tech careers, technology careers. And things like that are the norm for this custodian. So I'm really proud to be partnering with this custodian, and they are one of my primary service providers. I intentionally have made that choice to kind of celebrate that relationship and say I am very well aligned with this custodian. I could choose another custodian. I could choose other service providers that are different, but I really enjoy the fact that this custodian that I work with shares those socially conscious values. Also, things like banks, for example. A lot of people are seeking out Black-owned banks, for example. Now, I wasn't able to. I did some research and did some outreach, and because of where I'm located in my business, I wasn't eligible to work with a Black-owned bank. But in many areas, you may be eligible to bank with a Black-owned bank, which has a certain the criteria is to have a certain percentage of board or ownership that is minority. So that is something you can seek out. Also, there are banks that are demonstrating that they're socially conscious. They're certified B Corp banks that have to meet certain criteria for environmental impact and social impact. So you might seek out your banking relationship and even talk to your community bank and say, hey, what's your impact in the community? What sort of causes do you support? And maybe evaluate if your banking relationship makes sense for you. Plenty of other suppliers you can look at. What other suppliers and partners do you work with in your business? Do they align with your values, or do they have a contrast with? Is there a contrast or a conflict with your values? And if there's a conflict, maybe it's time to seek out other suppliers or other partners that align better with your values. Also, in operations, I would say to review the accessibility of your business. Things like ADA compliance. Is your website easily readable by screen readers, people with disabilities? Do you caption your videos? Is your marketing material accessible to people of varying levels of ability? Is your business itself, if you're a brick and mortar business, is your business physically accessible to people of varying levels of ability? Also, let's talk about access to services. So this is kind of a tricky one as well, because obviously we want to make sure that we're making money. Profit is a priority, and business growth and health is a priority. So it's going to be different for everybody. But if you have the ability to ensure that your services are accessible to a wide variety of people who may not otherwise have access, then that is something that I think can make an impact when it comes to being a socially conscious business. So one example for me, again, just kind of bringing it close to home so you can see an example in real life. So for me personally, as a financial advisor, a lot of times people that do what I do will have a minimum fee, or they'll have very rigid screening of who they work with. And that can take the form of, hey, if you don't have $500,000 or $1 million in investable assets, you don't meet my minimum, I can't work with you. Or there's a certain, dollar minimum, like it costs, X $1,000 per year to work with me. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything at all wrong with that. That's a choice those business owners have made that works for them. And there are plenty of other ways to be socially conscious. But for me personally, one thing I've chosen to do is to have no minimums. I have a very low price point that's actually graduated. So depending on your income level, my price point for starting up financial planning is different depending on your income level. So I'm using kind of a sliding scale there. And then I also have no minimum for investable assets. So that means I'm accessible to a lot of people that are just starting out. Maybe they have no investable assets yet. They're just getting started on their financial journey, and they literally have $0 in investments, and we're starting from zero. They wouldn't otherwise have access to this kind of help. And I have intentionally chosen to set up my business to be accessible to people who might not otherwise have access to help like that. So again, I'm not saying it's right for everybody, but that's one thing I've done. So think of in your business, are there ways that you can make your services accessible to people that might not otherwise have access to those services? Same with evaluating your products and services. We kind of talked about that. Also, how do you treat and empower your team members and potentially your partners? And by partners, I mean service providers and companies you work with. So I have had and still currently have businesses that have team members, employees. And you may or may not, you may be a solopreneur, maybe you have a small team, maybe you've got a large team, but how you treat and empower your team, I think, is an indication of how socially conscious you're making an attempt to be. So, one example, I used to own a marketing agency. I'm very open about that. It's on my website. I owned a marketing agency for 23 years and sold it in 2018. And I had a team of, when we sold it, we had 8 people on the team. At one time I had maybe as high as 14 people. So we've always had a small team. And I was not great at this for a while. Early on, I was very bad at this, quite honestly. I had a long journey to learn, and I'm still learning. But over the years, I feel that I learned how to be more socially conscious as an employer, empowering my people to have, freedom over their schedule, freedom over their work, avoiding micromanaging them, empowering them to have a strong work-life balance, which that phrase is really not great anymore, but more of a helping them wrap kind of work around their life, not the other way around, and making sure that, we were treating people well and treating people fairly. For example, when there were pregnancies, don't penalize, people for having children, give them the time off they need and really take care of people and treat them well. And, like I said, I wasn't always good at that, but there are a lot of ways you can empower and support your team that I think is a method of being socially conscious. So also, let's talk about your business communications and services in general. So this is one that I think is, to use business jargon that I hate, low-hanging fruit for many of us. I hate that phrase, but it just pops in my head, so I use it sometimes. So this is something we can all address, I think, universally. And that is, how do we use more inclusive language in our business communications and in our business practices? So again, going back to examples in my business as a demonstration or as an illustration, I work with, people that are single or people that are couples. And, when I'm working with maybe one person who I haven't met the other person in the relationship yet, I'll be talking to my client. I'll say, hey, okay, great. Do you, we might in the past have said, hey, do you, if it's a man I'm talking to, I might say, hey, are you married? Who's your wife? But instead I might say, you have a spouse or partner. That because we might be working with a same-sex couple or someone with different gender identities, and we don't want to assume anything. The minute we project our stereotypical traditional norms onto people, that instantly starts to create a level of discomfort for them. And my goal is to make sure that anyone working with me feels completely comfortable, feels like they're in a judgment-free zone, feels like this is an inclusive space that we're creating for them. And so my goal is to always say things like, hey, who's your spouse or partner? Are you married or with a partner? Not immediately jumping to, the words like husband and wife. Now, if they use those terms and that makes sense for them, yeah, that's great. But by not assuming, I am making my language and my communication inclusive to all. Also be aware of, pronouns. If someone demonstrates that their pronouns they have a preference in their pronouns, use those pronouns. It may be he, she, it may be they, it may be something else. So be aware of pronouns that people have preferences toward, and honor those. Use those pronouns and remember them, and do your best to use the pronouns they want to be used. So also review your messaging from a public standpoint. So this is tricky because it's very easy to become performative. So one example is, there are, during Pride Month, in June, you probably saw lots of organizations that changed their logo to rainbow colors for Pride Month. Okay, great. But many of those organizations had zero commitment to inclusion or to supporting the LGBT community before June. And someone in marketing just said, okay, let's just make our logo a rainbow this month for Pride. Okay, great. We look like we're, following a trend now. We look like we're being socially conscious. Okay. I wouldn't say that's horrible, but it's pretty performative. So I personally don't choose to do that. I might change my mind later, but I don't change my logo or do a lot of visual stuff when it comes to marketing for things like Pride Month or other timely events or things like that. I choose to keep it a little more behind the scenes because I don't want to feel like I'm being performative, like I'm just kind of performing for the world or saying, hey, look at me. I'd rather be a little more direct and behind the scenes about it. But I'm not saying that's right or wrong for you. So, maybe review your messaging. And so one thing I do is to share education. Or when my custodian altruist, for example, demonstrates, donations towards certain organizations or demonstrates commitment or education around being inclusive, I'll share those sorts of things. Or sometimes I will, write an article or create a post around that's educational around how to be more socially conscious and inclusive and make a positive impact in the world. So I will do those things. I consider them a little bit more subtle. And in general, these are all things you can do to kind of demonstrate your commitment to respect for all. Often in these in brick and mortar businesses, you'll see these little badges that are pretty cool, and they say, "Hey, this business serves everybody." And I like that because as a brick and mortar business, you're kind of sending a signal to people of all levels of, abilities, races, gender identities, preferences. You're sending a message that you are inclusive, you serve everybody. And I think if we can take that mindset in our businesses and make sure that we are making an effort to be sensitive and inclusive, then that goes a long way toward being socially conscious and making an impact, creating a space that is comfortable for all. So finally, I am a real big fan of educating and informing. And this gets really tricky because people like to argue, people like to criticize, people like to feel defensive about things. And so, one example is going back to giving and donating. One thing I do, and again, this is not to be performative or to virtue signal or to say that I'm so great, but one thing that I do in my business is every month I contribute to the Anti-Racism Daily newsletter. They allow you to contribute to support. I mean, it's a free newsletter. You can read it for free, but they say, hey, if you like what we're doing, then you can contribute on a monthly basis. So I do. I contribute a certain amount each month from my business, and that's one thing I'm contributing to. And it's a great source for education. So often if I see an article come along, it's a daily article, by the way, it's really great. You should go subscribe. But it's an article basically kind of unpacking and dissecting racial issues. And it's really educational. I've learned a ton. So it talks about things from historical perspective, systemic racism today, all sorts of biases. Also, it unpacks all sorts of things that are really useful for us to learn, especially for me as a straight white male to learn. It talks about privilege and all sorts of things that are really useful in my education. And I think it's really important. This is sort of a side soapbox. I think it's really important for all of us to avoid getting defensive right off the bat. It's really easy for people to get defensive and say, oh, well, I'm not even going to say what people say, but it's really easy to get defensive and make it political or whatever. But I don't think this should be political. I think we should treat people well. I think we should fight systemic racism. I think we should create inclusive spaces for people and support each other and make access to healthcare and housing and financial services better for all. So this is all stuff I think a lot of people agree on. But going back to one thing I do as a business, as in your business social media properties, for example, or your business communications, I think it is appropriate for some businesses that are comfortable doing this to share education. So I do share articles from Anti-Racism Daily sometimes. I do share articles that I think respectfully and thoughtfully educate people and help them think about things that they might not otherwise think about. So you can use your business as a conduit, as a platform, as a mouthpiece to share education. And I think education is one of the best things we can do to make an impact. Yes, giving money is great. Yes, arguing with people on Facebook, arguably not as great. But if you can thoughtfully share education and do your best to inform in a way that resonates with people and gets the point across in a way that people will listen is very useful. I think that can help change hearts and minds, so to speak. Sounds a little cheesy to say it that way, but so I think educating and informing by using your business as a platform is very socially conscious and can make a pretty significant impact in the people you serve and the people that observe. So that's my list of things. There's probably things I haven't thought of. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear if you have ways, if you're a small business owner, what are some ways that you are being socially conscious in your business? How are you building a socially conscious business in your world? I would love to hear about that. And I always say contact me, but in this particular case, I would really love to hear specifically from you about this. So email me at podcast@elevationfinancial.com. And I'd really like to hear from my listeners as well. I see you out there in my stats, so I know you're there. So I'd love to hear your feedback on what you think makes a socially conscious business. So with that, as always, I'm going to cue up the music here. So let's remember where to reach out and find me if you'd like more information or if you'd like to chat about this or anything else. You can find me at elevationfinancial.com. And as always, you can feel free to book a complimentary money session on my website. It is complimentary, as the name implies, and you can schedule it online at your convenience, and we can chat about whatever is on your mind. So with that, thanks for joining me today. As always, have a great day. We'll see you next time.